I thought the worst moment of my life was watching my mother's attorney press play on a video where she stared straight into the camera and pronounced, "Me worthless like your father," while handing my sisters every last thing with her name on it. I was wrong. The worst came 3 days later, on a hot July morning in Newark, when a stranger at a Manhattan bank said a sentence so calm and impossible that I dropped my phone and sank to the curb like I'd been told the sky had a trap door. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. My name is Evan Cole, 36, and I live above my woodshop on Ferry Street in the iron-bound Newark, New Jersey. My place is 2 rooms deep, floors scarred with old nail patterns, the air always carrying a braid of linseed oil, oak dust, and hot coffee. Every morning I wipe the brass knobs on the front door with a cloth that used to be a bantee, chalk a to-do list on the slate by the register, and roll open the gate to the sidewalk just as the bakery 2 doors down starts sliding trays of sweet bread into their cases. I refurbish heirloom pieces, secretaries with sticky drawers, dining tables warped by steam radiators, lamps with cracked bakelite switches, because I like the honesty of objects that have been put to work and need only patience to become themselves again. The little moleskin I keep in my back pocket holds measurements, aged glue formulas, and the names of clients I can't afford to disappoint. On my good weeks, I clear enough to pay the $1,280 rent on the space, the $475 payment on the battered Ford Transit I use for pickups, and the $12 bottles of Tite Bond I go through like water. On bad weeks, I close the gate early and work deeper into the night, sanding until the palm of my hand vibrates long after the sander is quiet, telling myself that craftsmanship, truth, and the steadiness of a clean joint are the only forms of wealth that don't lie to you. That was the life I believed in on July 12, 2025, when I sat in a conference room at Ralston and Phelps LLP on Halsey Street with my sisters, Hannah and Lila, watching our mother's posthumous video message and trying to keep my face still. The room smelled like citrus cleaner and paper. The blinds were half closed, against the heat, and the little red recording light on the screen made it look like our mother was still being captured and saved even as her words landed like stones. She was 66 when she died, still wearing her lipstick like armor, still turning her mouth into a thin line whenever she looked at me. "You've never been serious," she said into the camera. "Just like your father, I won't see what I built squandered." Then she put on a smile the way people put on sunglasses in photographs. "To my daughters, Hannah and Lila, the balance of my estate, valued at $38 million to be split evenly." The attorney paused the video to confirm the distribution clauses and the trust vehicles, and I had the stupid thought that maybe there would be a sentence for me I'd missed, something like a gold watch or a cottage key. Instead, when the video resumed, my mother said, "For Evan, the old briefcase in my closet. He always liked junk. The briefcase was there in the conference room already, sitting on a chair as if it had an appointment of its own. It was dark brown leather, cracked along the hinges, the brass combination dials dulled to a yellow the color of the inside of a walnut shell. I angled it toward me, pressed the thumb-worn tabs. It opened with the small, surprised sigh of tired leather. Inside were 2 sharpened pencils, their erasers long hardened, a thin stack of blank onion skin paper, a rubber band fossilized into a square, and a business card. White, thick, beveled edges. Holloway Trust, embossed with a Manhattan address, 515 Madison Avenue, and a phone number in clean serif type. Under it, in my father's careful print, a date, July 14th, 2005. Hannah snorted. Lila pressed the back of her knuckle to her mouth, like she was trying not to laugh in church. "Perfect," Hannah said. "You always like the vintage look." I slid the card into my wallet, because that's what you do when you don't want to give anyone the pleasure of watching you throw something away. I told myself it was just a piece of paper, but the weight of the briefcase handle on my palm felt like it had something inside that wasn't on the surface. I slept badly. I kept seeing the date in my head the way my father wrote his fours like little chairs. My father, Tom Cole, died on October 21st, 2005. A heart attack in the driveway while he was wrestling a waterlogged mattress into the bed of his truck after a flood job for a neighbor. He'd been a contractor who built modest additions that didn't leak and kept his receipts in cigar boxes. My mother, Marianne, always said she married under her station and then spent the rest of her life trying to climb back. The only thing she and my father agreed on was that I was a disappointment for different reasons. He wanted me to take over his tools. She wanted me to stop looking like someone who owned tools. On July 15th at 8:03 a.m., I stood in my shop with the phone to my ear and the business card on the counter like a dare. The line rang twice. Holloway Trust, Client Services, a woman said, her voice all morning professionalism. I found a card, I said, with your number. Belonged to my father, Thomas Cole. The date on it is July 14th, 2005. There was a silence long enough for me to hear the delivery truck outside drag a dolly over the curb. Please hold, she said. 2 minutes, maybe 3. I watched sawdust float in a shaft of sun and settle on the counter like it had been given instructions. When she came back, her voice had changed. Mr. Cole, I'm transferring you to Senior Client Services. A new voice, a man, crisp but warmer. Mr. Cole, my name is Kenji Sato. We've been waiting 20 years for this call. The lock matured yesterday. If you have the object, we need you to come to the Madison Avenue office today. Bring it with you. Don't mail it. Bring identification. Wait, I said. What is this? Another small pause, and when he spoke again, he sounded like he was picking his way across thin ice. It's your father's account. It has just unlocked. What kind of account? Mr. Cole, he said, and something like apology moved under the surface of his words. That's a conversation we have in person. The line went dead after he gave me a time slot, 11 a.m., and I looked at the briefcase and realized I was still in my apron. I locked the shop and told the bakery I'd be back later, as if that was a promise anyone needed me to keep. By 9:12 a.m., I was on the PATH train to 33rd Street, holding the briefcase on my lap like a borrowed infant. The lobby at 515 Madison was marble on marble, the kind of cool that feels like a decision not to sweat. The Holloway Trust reception desk had the calming emptiness of expensive hotel lobbies, no clutter, no free pens, just space that tells you to behave yourself. The receptionist took my license and the card. She placed both on a glass pad that glowed softly green, like a breath. One moment, Mr. Cole. A man in a gray suit stepped out of the elevator bank and introduced himself as Dennis, security. He had the kind of softness around the eyes that makes you trust a bouncer. If you'll come with me, sir. We went down, not up. The elevator stopped at B3, the doors opening onto a quieter world where the carpet thickened and the air diffused into that museum. Hush you only get when money has paid to turn sound into a polite suggestion. At a small desk, a woman in a navy blazer, Ms. Alvarez, asked for my right thumb. A scanner drank it. She compared the live red to a file that was older than smartphones, then had me sign my name 3 times on a digital pad, slowly, so the pressure and hesitations could be recorded and matched to a baseline from my father's file. Notaries en route, Ms. Alvarez said. Sit tight. Mr. Sato appeared at 11:04, slight, precise, the tie knot that tells you a man still ties his own. He carried a thin folder and a key affixed to a heavy oblong of brass stamped with a number and Holloway's crest. Mr. Cole, he said, thank you for coming. He steered me into a room that looked like a small gallery. No art, just a table of leather that made no sound when you touched it and 4 chairs that rolled like skating rinks. He placed my father's card on the table, then the brass key. First, we verify the custodial item. The briefcase, I said. Yes. Dennis stood behind me in a way that wasn't threatening but wasn't not. Ms. Alvarez returned with a notary stamp and a rectangular box. Open, please, Sato said, nodding at the briefcase. I spun the old dials to 000, my father's poor idea of a secret, and the locks popped with that same leathery sigh. Sato lifted the lid with 2 fingers, glanced at the pencils, the onion skin, the fossilized rubber band, then slid the lining panel back on its tiny ball detents to reveal a hidden compartment I swear I'd never seen. Inside, nestled in an oval of felt, lay a nickel-sized disc of stainless steel on a leather thong. It looked like a dog tag that had lost its chain. On one side was the Holloway crest. On the other, a string of tiny, hand-stamped letters and numbers. Token, Sato said quietly. We call it a vein key. He placed the disc on a reader, then asked me to place my right hand under a small hood. A soft light warmed my skin. Vein maps are like fingerprints, he said, but harder to fake. Your father's instructions say the successor must share blood and present the token. He glanced at Ms. Alvarez. She nodded. The notary stamped something that sounded like a small cough. Sato slid the brass key toward me across the leather. We're ready. They led me to a vault door that would not have looked out of place in a movie you reserve for the good TV. Dennis inserted a card. Sato turned the key. A line of lights snapped from red to green in sequence. Inside, the corridor was concrete and quiet. We stopped at a box. Sato used the brass key again, then his own smaller key, and when he slid the drawer out and set the steel box on a table, he looked at me in a way that made me feel like he was handing over a child. Mr. Cole, he said, This isn't what you think it is. When he lifted the lid, it wasn't stacks of cash or velvet bags of stones. It was paper, a specific attended to kind of paper. At the top, a trust instrument with my father's name, Thomas A. Cole, and an entity I had never heard of, Quiet Harbor Holdings, LLC. Behind that, a partnership agreement for North Star Logistics Partners, signed July 14, 2005, my father's signature neat and unwavering. Then there were assignments, amendments, and a thick sheaf of letters on letterhead I recognized from business journalism I read when I wanted to feel left out. The acquisition of North Star by Hamilton Pierce Freight Corporation in 2016, a carve-out to a private equity fund, then a sale, in April 2024, to a public company at a valuation that made the back of my neck turn cold. Sato unfolded a ledger page with a column of numbers that looked like a flight of steps leading to a place you don't talk about in front of people you love. Your father's stake was small in percentage, he said, but significant in absolute value and carried forward through transactions under the Quiet Harbor vehicle. The distribution was timed, per his instructions, to be held in escrow by Holloway until July 14, 2025, with no access before then. 2 signatories could unlock, Thomas Cole alive or, after 20 years, his designated successor verified by DNA and token. He met my eyes. As of yesterday, the amount is $142,775,318.22. I sat down too quickly, and the chair rolled back a few inches, which made Dennis step forward without meaning to. I put my hand on the steel box as if grounding myself to keep from floating away. In my head, 38 million split between my sisters, the number that had sounded like a wall you couldn't climb, shrank like a balloon that had realized it was too large for the room it was in. I opened my mouth and closed it again. Sato sat across from me and waited, the way a good human waits while another one catches up. The account holds the cash leg of the last distribution, he said quietly. There are also North Star, legacy assets your father directed to be transferred to a foundation upon your election. We'll discuss that if you're willing. He pulled a small stack of photographs from the bottom of the box. They were glossy prints of a pair of hands I knew, knucks scarred from a lifetime of bringing lumber into the world, holding a prototype of a modular freight pallet lock, steel teeth that bit into each other at a twist, making 2 pallets into one unit. Under the photo, my father had written in Sharpie, "Sometimes the little piece is the part that keeps everything from sliding around." If I'd been standing, I would have had to sit. In the new silence, I heard a faint whirring sound, and it took me a moment to realize it was the air system adjusting to a door opening down the corridor. There was more in the box. A bundle of letters sealed in brown string, a flash drive, and a smaller envelope with my name on it in my father's careful block print. What I had to read next would change the way I remembered every argument my parents ever had. I broke the string on the letters last. First, I slid a thumb under the small envelope and tilted out a folded note and a key the size of a thumbnail. The note was 3 lines. "Evan, if you have this, the time I asked for has arrived. There's a locker at the Newark Penn Station baggage room. Use the tiny key. There's one more thing you have to hear before you do anything else. Dad." Sato nodded when I showed him the key, as if he'd been expecting me to find it. "We'll hold here," he said. "The foundation conversation can wait." He looked at the sealed bundle of letters like the wound that doesn't want to be opened in public. "Take the briefcase. Bring back what you find." His trust in me felt like a second, smaller vault opening. Back above ground on Madison Avenue, the summer heat hugged my shirt to my back, and for a moment the city smelled like pretzels and hot metal. I took the 6 to 33rd and the path back to Newark, the briefcase on my knees again, the little key hidden under the tongue of my left sneaker where I used to hide lunch money in middle school. At Newark Penn, I found the baggage room, an old-school counter with a real person, glass scratched with 1,000 tired keys. The locker bay was a grid of little doors that looked like safe deposit boxes had been hired as extras in a movie about trains. The key turned without hesitation. The door swung open to reveal a flat gray foam case with a Sony logo and a mini disc recorder that looked like it had been carefully kept alive past its natural death date. On top, a yellow sticky note in my father's hand, "Play at home. Alone." I played it at the workbench after rolling down my gate and putting a "Do Not Disturb" sign over the bell. The machine whirred, clicked, and then his voice came into my shop as if he'd gone out for coffee and come back. "Son," he said, and the word plugged a hole in my chest I hadn't known was open, if you're hearing this. It means I did a hard thing and stuck to it. I didn't tell your mother about Quiet Harbor. I didn't tell anyone because if I did, it would be a fight we couldn't come back from. I chose to be called worthless in the room so that something valuable would happen later in a room I wouldn't be in. Your mother and I had our own war. She was harder than me. I was stubborn in a way that looks like laziness to people who think progress only counts if it can be photographed. I loved her, sincerely, but I knew I couldn't set you up for a fight you'd lose. I built what I built so that the work you love could be work, not punishment. You weren't made to climb a ladder you don't respect. He stopped. I heard him breathe. I found myself copying his breathing, like he was teaching me a thing I was going to need shortly. She didn't understand North Star because I didn't make her, he said. And that's on me. She thought the pallets were just pallets. What I had was a piece of the lock that kept the whole system from slipping. I made the deal with Holloway after a long day that smelled like sawdust and salt, and I asked them to sit on it for 20 years because grief makes people throw things they mean to keep. I wanted it out of arm's reach until you were old enough to open the door without setting the house on fire. There was a long exhale. I know she said things in front of you. I heard some. She needed to be the most right person in any room. I think I loved her more than I loved being right. He let it sit there, that sentence, like a coin that lands and doesn't wobble. There are letters in the box for her, he said. If she's gone, you do what you think is decent. There are instructions for the foundation I want in our name, but I've left room for your hands to shape it. Don't fight your sisters for the 38. Let that stand. Build something that makes you impossible to ignore without raising your voice. I believe in your eye and your patience. They'll outlast any last name. The recording clicked. I waited for more. There wasn't any. The mini disc hummed and stopped like a bird landing. I was aware of my own heartbeat. One of my wall clocks ticked in a way it usually doesn't once the shop gets loud. I put my head down on my forearm and let my eyes prick while the wood smell reminded me I was allowed to occupy the same planet as my father's voice. I didn't sleep much that night either, but I didn't mind. In the morning, I went back to Holloway with the mini disc, the note, and more of myself than I'd had the day before. The confrontation wasn't spray-painted on a billboard. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 1 p.m., when my sisters could meet me at Ralston and Phelps. I asked Ms. Ralston for the large conference room, and this time I arranged the chairs myself. I made little name placards, Hannah, Lila, Evan, because there's something about seeing your name on a folded triangle that makes you sit up straighter and treat the air in front of you like it has consequences. I brought a small easel too, with 3 things in frames: a blown-up still of my father's signature on the North Star agreement, a photograph of the pallet lock in his hands, and a copy of the ledger line Mr. Sato said I could show. No number, just distribution, Quiet Harbor Holdings, the words that had turned my floor into something elastic. Hannah arrived first, in a navy pantsuit that meant business even if the business was just posture. Lila arrived 5 minutes late with sunglasses on her head and the apologetic smile of someone who expects forgiveness as part of the entree. They looked at the name placards, like I'd done a trick. "What's this?" Hannah said. "Seats," I said. "There's a narrative, and I'd like us to sit still for it." Hannah smiled without her eyes. "You could have sent an email. Some things deserve chairs," I said. I didn't talk about the number. I didn't talk about money at all. I put my fingers on the top of the easel, like you do when you're about to fall off a roof and would like it not to happen. "I'm not here to challenge Mom's will," I said. "I'm not asking for a rebalancing. I'm here to put something in the room that will change how we use our names when we talk about our father." I flipped the first frame. My father's signature in black, July 14th, 2005. Lila leaned forward, sunglasses sliding down her hair. "What is that?" "Choice," I said. I flipped the second frame, the pallet lock in my father's hands, the scuff of his wedding ring visible, grease stubborn under his fingernails. He made something small but crucial for North Star. He did it so well that when the company moved and merged and sold, his piece came along. He put his stake into a mechanism designed to resist being torn apart by people who don't like how the load shifts when they aren't looking. Hannah pressed the cap back onto her pen. "Are you asking us for money?" she said. "No," I said. "I'm asking you to leave worthless out of our father's obituary when you write it out loud. And I'm inviting you to a thing that's bigger than the 38. There's a foundation in the works, per his instructions, that will put apprentices into Newark shops and pay for their tools. We're going to name it for him and for the one thing he knew we'd all share forever, whether we liked it or not." "What's that?" Lila said, wary now in that way people get when they sense the generosity might be expensive. "Blood," I said. I let that sit. Quiet Harbor's distributions, some of them, can seed an endowment at NGIT for first-generation engineers who can figure out how to make small pieces that make big systems stay honest. The rest will fund a program here on Ferry Street paying living wages for kids who would otherwise be told their hands are for trouble. I want your help, not your permission. If you want to roll, it's yours. If you want to pass, that's fine too. But what you don't get to do anymore is say, like your father, and mean it as a curse. Hannah's face went through 3 expressions I couldn't name and didn't need to. She looked at the frames again. He didn't tell us, she said. He didn't tell her. He knew what it would cost, I said. He decided he could pay. He left us the receipt. I set the mini disc recorder on the table and pressed play. My father's voice filled the conference room with the same measured roughness it had filled my shop. I watched my sisters listen. I watched Hannah's hand travel without planning to touch the photograph of his hands. I watched Lila take off her sunglasses and not remember to put them down before she started wiping her eyes with the skeleton of a frame that didn't help much. He loved her more than he loved being right, Hannah repeated after the recorder clicked off, like she needed to see if the sentence still worked outside his voice. I nodded. It's a strange thing to be, but it's not a bad thing, Lila inhaled like she was about to be underwater. What do you want us to do? I turned the 3rd frame to the ledger words. Come with me to Holloway on Friday, I said. Sit in a room where Dad is treated like the man he actually was. Sign onto the foundation board if you're willing. We'll ask Ms. Ralston to draft a family statement about Dad that is true, and we'll set up a training day in my shop next month with cameras, not for spin, for record. If you want to be in the pictures, you can be. If you don't, don't. Either way, the thing will exist. And the money? Hannah said, returning to the planet she understood by asking a question in its language. It's committed, I said. Not to you, not to me, to the work. A figure that makes 38 look small will do more good sitting in a machine that throws off quiet dividends of dignity. They were quiet for a long minute. In the hall, a phone rang on someone's desk and went to voicemail. My father's voice had changed the gravity in the room so completely that even the framed certificates on the wall looked like they were hanging a little more level. We went to Holloway that Friday. Mr. Sato brought us to a different room with a narrower table that made us sit closer. He had a stack of documents that smelled faintly of fresh ink and something older. Maybe it was the paper itself, cotton-rich, the kind that makes you aware of what you're holding. He laid out the steps, and it struck me again how the credible part of an institution isn't the marble, it's the concentration, the way smart people look you in the eye and ask you to sign your name on the same line the right number of times until a thing is indisputable. We signed the foundation documents first, the Thomas A. Cole Apprenticeship Fund. Minimum annual grant commitments, a seat for each of us, should we want it, a professional director drawn from NJIT's engineering program, a clause that required public reporting so nobody could later pretend the thing was a rumor. We signed a family statement drafted in Ms. Ralston's no-nonsense paragraphs, a thing so clean and plain it made the truth look like it had always been in the open. Thomas A. Cole was a builder of durable things. He provided for his family with work seen and unseen. We honor his care with care. We signed a memorandum with Holloway that released the number only to tax authorities and to the endowment's investment manager. Sato watched our hands, turning the paper to make it easier for each person, not because he needed to, but because it's his way of reminding people they're human. When we were done, Sato closed the folder with the small satisfaction of a good clasp. There is one more item, he said. He held up my father's sealed letters, one of which had my mother's name on it. If you'd like, we can courier this to the cemetery to be placed with her, or you can keep it privately. It's not a legal instrument. It's... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Hannah touched the envelope with 2 fingers. She would have read it and smiled with only her teeth, she said. Send it to her anyway. Let the ground have it. We walked out of Holloway, into the late sun, like people who'd been underwater and had agreed, for once, to breathe at the same time. On the sidewalk, we didn't hug. We didn't perform. We stood there in a little triangle while the city moved around us, and I could feel the thing my father had tried, to calculate. The delay between an action and its benefit. The way you can plant a stake in the ground, and 20 years later, it's a post you can tie a slackline to, so you can walk into the next decade without falling. The work came quickly. You don't put money into the world without it creating motion. Ms. Ralston handled the filings, and Jeet sent a dean in a neat gray dress to walk the shop with me, pointing out where we could add low, noise, dust collection, and safe tool stations. I called my landlord and negotiated a second bay next door at a rent I could live with now that my sleep wasn't a ledger. We ordered 8 maple workbenches with vices that turned and held with one hand. I went to a place in Kearney that buys old factory fixtures and found a rack of battered metal stools with dents that looked like stories. We had a sign made for the front, hand-painted by a guy named Manny who used to letter trucks, Coal Works, Learn, and Make. I walked the shop early on a Sunday, ensuring every clamp rotated smoothly, every chisel stone had water in its tray, every safety poster was at eye level and looked like advice, not orders. I traced a finger along the grain of a long piece of ash and thought about my father's pallet lock, the way you keep a load from sliding by committing small pieces to decisiveness. We put the first call for apprentices on the community board near the Prudential Center and in the guidance offices at Eastside High. We told kids to bring their hands and their questions, and we'd provide everything else. I called my sisters again, too. Bring your kids if you want, I told them. Let them see a place where patience gets to be the loudest thing in the room. Hannah said she would. Lila said she might. Both were better answers than they would have given me a year ago. The night before the first cohort arrived, I took the briefcase down from the shelf. I cleaned the brass dials with a bit of flitz until they reflected my fingers. I put the business card back inside. I slipped my father's little stainless token into the hidden oval again. Not because I needed it there, but because objects keep promise by repeating their original position. I placed the mini disc recorder in the foam cutout I'd made for it and closed the lid. The sigh of the leather didn't sound tired anymore. It sounded like a room exhaling after hearing a difficult truth spoken with no sarcasm in it. There were practicalities to take care of that would have made my mother proud. Not that I need to run my life by the hypothetical approvals of the dead. Insurance policies, calendars filed with NGIT so we wouldn't be stepping on other programs, contracts with a local coffee shop for a thermos service because craft requires caffeine, and the dignity of a 10-minute break with good cups. None of it was glamorous. All of it was better than performing resentment. On the first morning of the program, 8 kids stood under the sign. Some had already decided how to make their faces into shields. One kid held his fingers like he'd been given something you don't want to hold wrong. I opened the gate like I do every morning and let them in. "Welcome," I said, and meant it. The shop smelled the way it always does, wood and electricity. I showed them the chalkboard, their names in my worst teacher hand, and the first project laid out like 4 places, at a table. A box with a lid that fits without forcing it. I put a photograph of my father's hands by the clamps. I told them a little of what we were going to do and none of what we were not. 10 minutes in, the room made its own new noise. At lunch, I unlocked the conference room we'd carved out of the second bay and sat at the table with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote a letter to my mother anyway. I wrote it in clean, unstylized sentences. I told her about the apprentices. I told her about Manny's sign and how he painted the shadow on the letters with his wrists steady like a surgeon. I told her about Hannah and Lila listening to Dad's voice and the way none of us turned away when the sentence landed. He loved her more than he loved being right. I talked about the way money that's been asked to wait behaves when you tell it it's time to stop being a secret. I didn't accuse her. I didn't absolve her. I folded the letter and put it in the briefcase among the things that will not be filed with the state but will govern me anyway. That evening, after the kids left, and the shop was a little filthy in the way that means you've saved something from being unused, I turned out the lights and stood in the doorway, hand on the brass handle. The street outside was still warm, the bakery packing away what hadn't sold. In the dim, my father's framed ledger line looked almost like a horizon. People who love you don't always give you what you can easily carry. Sometimes they hand you a thing that looks like junk and leave the room before you find the compartment where the shape you needed was hidden. Standing there, I could hear my mother's sentence again, but it no longer fit the space she'd wanted it to occupy. Worthless is what people say when a value refuses to present itself on demand. The briefcase in my hand had cost him more than any of us will know and had bought me a life I can state without blinking. When I lock the gate now, the weight in my palm is only leather and brass, and the quiet proof that love told the long way doesn't need anyone to be right to end up true.